Well, welcome into another episode of Sweet Tea and Coffee. My name is Kendall McDonald. I'm the pastor here at Fredonia Hill, and I'm sitting here with my co-host, Blake Russell. And today, you may not recognize Blake. Blake's been a little under the weather, and so it may not sound like Blake, but it really is.
I've got a smooth voice this morning.
It's smooth jazz here. So we're going to jump in. We're actually going to tackle some moments from our adolescent years. It's going to get scary, so brace yourselves, but that's going to be the topic of our conversation for today. Well, it may seem like a bit of a random topic, but I'll kind of try it, Blake, and give us a framework for why I'm even thinking about this. We have mentioned before that a few weeks ago we had the opportunity to go and take the kids to camp, and then Matt and I went and took them, brought them back home. But we went a little early so we could stay, and just being there with them at camp and watching them wrestle with the things that God was saying and doing, and just brought back a lot of memories, not specifically just church camp memories, but I was just really thinking about that time in my life. And then actually yesterday I got the chance to spend time with them on a Wednesday night and just was thinking about that. So just that period of my life in watching them has been on my mind. And I think as adults, sometimes we look back on those years, and I don't want to use the word discredit, but I think we diminish what God does in our lives in those times. And a lot of times I think we look back on those, and even sometimes we look at kids now and we kind of just go, oh, that's just being a teenager, right. Or whatever. And I think we diminish the work of God in our lives. So I was just thinking, man, actually, no, that was a really formative, really important stretch of my life. And I'm talking about from when I was in high school up to the first couple of years in college. And I think it's important that we look back on those things and that we kind of point out the activity of God. I don't know if that.
Yeah,
what do you think?
I think there's a lot of, if you just look at maybe, I'll be even generous with this, maybe a 10-year span, how much is kind of crammed into that 10 years in your growth and development, not only, just physically and mentally, but spiritually, how much happens in that moment. And as you were pitching this idea this morning, I just started thinking about just different things that happened in my life in that short period of time, and that it's just incredible to kind of think back of what God was doing and shaping and molding in those years.
Yeah, it seems like those years they vary from person to person. It's not always the same story, but for many, those years include their conversion.
Right.
They meet Jesus. I've heard a ton of people talk about, that the teenage years. Maybe they were saved when they were younger, and they come to this point where they go, actually, that was some version of my parents' faith, and now I need to embrace that. They have this deep encounter with Jesus there that is something like a conversion. And then for many, it's a time where they really have to battle with the desire for the things of the world,
right,
and laying those things down,
right,
or and then versus following Jesus, and everybody's stories vary kind of within that. Some people just totally walk away at that point. That's a point where actually they walk away, and it's in their adult life that they come back to those moments and go, no, God was really he was present in my life. He was pursuing me, and I need to kind of return to that. So I think recalling those stories
that's good, is
important and helpful. It's certainly not just the teenage years that God is active and working in those times. So I don't know, as I think about my story, there's plenty of moments. You and I, this is a sweet tea and coffee moment,
right?
Because you're actually kind of like my wife. You have this sparkling record, and I'll be honest, I get around people with sparkling records, and I kind of go, ugh. There's a little.
Let me tell you
jealousy
a little story here. I was a pretty good kid and all up through elementary school. If that's hard to believe.
I'm not at all shocked.
And into high school, and never really had any kind of disciplinary issues in that regard.
This is coming from the guy. I think this is important to put on record. This is coming from the guy that at one point told me he has dressed the same.
Yeah, that's true.
Since he was like, 10 years old? Like you've been wearing jeans and a collar since
pretty much it.
Since you were 10 and a pair of boots.
But so there was a moment in so I never got in trouble in elementary school, and what we called was marks. Yeah, I never got any marks.
Oh yeah, disciplinary marks,
whatever it is. Yeah. Except I got one, and it was in third grade.
But I bet it was unjust.
It was completely unjust. We had homework folders, and I had done my homework that night and stuck it in the folder. But my mom, she's all about keeping things organized and clean and getting rid of junk in the house. And she opened up my folder and took the homework out, thought it was old, threw it away. I get to school the next morning, open up my folder, my homework's not there.
Oh, no.
And so the teacher doesn't believe me that my mom threw away my homework.
It's kind of like the dog ate my homework, right?
Yeah, she just assumed that I didn't do it and I threw it away or something.
She thinks you're throwing your mom under the bus.
Which is crazy that the teacher would assume that I didn't do it.
Yeah,
because I never got in trouble.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I got my mark.
Oh my goodness, an unjust mark.
Yeah, it devastated me. And my mom felt bad. She tried to explain to the teacher, and the teacher didn't take it back or anything. Interesting story. That teacher went to our church. Not at that time, but years later, she started coming to our church, and we came back and told her that story, and she felt awful. She was like, "That was the only mark that Blake had ever through his entire, elementary and high school, whatever." And it was like, "Yeah, that was it." So. But
there was this perception. I don't know. In school, it was brilliant, and I hope I'm not ruining something for parents right now, but I really believed that the things that happened in elementary school, the marks you got,
that went on your
there was some place where that was documented.
It's on your rap
forever.
sheet.
Yeah. That my next teachers down the road, we're going to look at that and go, I see who you are.
Here they come. I think.
Spoiler alert.
Teachers do talk. Teachers do talk.
That's right. They do. They do. And kids, listen. Don't take that too far. There is a record that you can develop.
If there are any elementary students listening to this podcast, yes, there's a rap sheet. So
yeah. So beware. That's so funny. The only mark that you had. I've got to tell this story, and then we'll maybe get into some more serious stuff. But I think the beginning of my rebellion. See, I'm not like Blake. I had plenty of marks, plenty of moments, but I remember one in particular because this goes just kudos and shout out to my parents. Just great parenting. My mom was cold-blooded in her discipline. And so we couldn't chew gum at our junior high, which people say middle school, whatever. In Midland, it was called junior high. I think I must have been in the 7th grade. So you couldn't chew gum. So my teacher catches me with gum in my mouth, which is a violation, but it's a minor violation. Right. And the teacher just says, go spit it out. And so I go and fake spit out my gum. I just go to the trash can and I'm like, I'm going to rebel, right? I'm going to just keep my gum.
Right.
Well, I'm an absolute fool and continue to smack the gum in an obvious way. So the teacher catches me again. Well, this is a problem. This is now now I'm in trouble because I've been dishonest. And so I get sent to the principal. And this is back in the day where you still had SWATs. So shout out to those days.
I think we thought that the principal had an electric paddle. That was the rumor that was going around, that when Miss Skinner would spank you,
there was
a jolt of yeah. So that was enough for me to not get any marks. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that's true. You didn't need motivation more, but it was not a deterrent for me. I don't think we had an electric paddle. But anyway, so I go to the principal. He walks me through it and basically says, "Okay, you either get detention or you get SWATs." Well, I was in football at the time, and I knew that if I had detention, that I would miss a portion of football practice, and that the punishment for that was
that's not going to be
you're going to run till you puke,
Right.
So I'm not about that. So it's like, no. And if I can get SWATs, then the coaches won't know. I'll be good. I'll get off the hook. So I say SWATs. Well, of course, that if you're going to get SWATs, there has to be parent permission.
Right.
I didn't know this. So they call my parents. They call my mom.
So this turns into a big deal.
So now my choice is what I thought was good strategy is not good strategy. They call my mom, and they walk her through it, and I can hear mom on the other end of the phone, and it's super quiet, which is terrifying. She's just quiet, calm, cool, collected, scaring me to death. And the principal says, here's all that's happened, and I could either give him detention or SWATs, but I just need your permission. And mom says, what did he choose? And the principal says, well, he chose SWATs. And mom goes, in this, and I don't know, I think I'm making this up bigger in my mind, but mom goes, give him detention. The opposite of what I wanted.
Yeah.
She just wanted to know what I wanted, and she was going to make it worse. So I had detention. I had to run. The coach is just, it was awful. But anyway, that was kind of the beginning of my rebellion. What's interesting about that in my life, so from there, I would say all the way till I was a junior or senior in high school, man, it was a massive wrestling match for me. I was a Christian at that point, and it was a massive wrestling match for me of turning loose of things of the world. And I can talk about it, I think, in more clear terms now than I could have articulated then, but it was basically a laying down of my passions, of my desires, of the way I used to do things. And that for me was a fight. Right. I was not going to easily follow Jesus.
Yeah.
There were allegiances that I had to the things of the world that I was going to cling to tightly. Right. And that spanned a lot of years. And there's some stories there of just specific moments, but I'm curious just kind of what that looked like for you. I know with a sparkling record, you and I have this very different story, but I know your story has a lot to do with ministry. You were doing ministry. I was not this way. You were doing ministry when you were in your teenage years.
Right.
And I know for you, what kind of had to happen was that your ministry life had to get decoupled from your following Jesus. You needed to be able to see those separately, and God had to kind of show you that in a unique way. I don't know, what was that stretch like for you?
Well, as I talked about in the first episode, so much of my life was kind of revolved around the life of the church, which is a great thing for a kid. Right. I mean, it's a great influence. I always had good friends, and so much of my identity was kind of tied up with that mentality. And like I said, early on, I kind of felt this call to ministry and started down that path. But because of kind of the morality kind of thing, I've thought that a lot of it was if I worked really hard, I could kind of achieve what I wanted to the goal I wanted to get to. But that wasn't, I mean, we know that that's not the case. It's not by our own work of how hard we can work to achieve something. It's by the grace of God and what He's teaching us through that. And so, we've talked a little bit about how I was in a band, and we were really kind of starting to get some traction in ministry and traveling. And the next logical step for a band is to try to get a record deal. I mean, that was the case back then. I think you can kind of get away from that now, but and so we had this opportunity to go to Nashville and play for some record labels, which was huge. Right. And I remember,
especially for guys that are young and
I mean, okay, so at the time I was 20 years old, and the other guys I was the oldest in the band at the time. So
you've always been the old man, Blake.
I've always been the old man. Yeah, even on that trip, I'm the guy that's like doing all the planning. I'm doing all the driving. I've got the hotel set up. I've got everything.
I am not shocked.
Yeah. Got the itinerary, and so I remember the trip up to Nashville, and we were like, "This is it. We've worked really hard the last several years, and we've seen the fruit of our successes, and this is going to be it. We're going to come in here and we're going to blow the socks off of these guys." And so I remember going to a soundstage in East Nashville and setting all of our stuff up and just feeling real good, and played our set. I think it was like 3 or 4 songs. It was some original songs that we had written, and there's a panel in the back of all the label executives, and they were just kind of looking at us and writing some things down. I thought, yeah, this is it. And we walked off stage, and they're like, okay, we'll give you a report a little bit later on. And so we're waiting and just excited. One guy comes back out, an older guy, and he goes, well, here you go. And he hands us a packet, and it's just thick of all the notes they made. And he goes, I really liked you, but I think we're going to go a different direction. And I was just like, oh, gosh, just like a punch in the gut, you know? Yeah. And because the whole time while we were playing and setting up, even like the sound engineer's like, yeah, you guys sounded great. That was awesome, you know, and like just really building us up. Yeah. And then we get back our report, and I would never forget. I opened it up and started thumbing through it. And one of the comments was from one of the guys that says, you look like a band. And that was it. And I was like, so we look like one, but
what does that mean?
We don't sound like a band. You know, what does that mean? And it was a lot of unanswered questions for us at that point. And we were all kind of in a transition time where some of the guys were wanting to go to college somewhere else, and there was a chance that we might split up. And that's pretty much what happened. I remember the drive. I remember driving through Arkansas, coming back to Texas, and just thinking, okay, God, what do I do with this? Because this is what I thought, and I've been working really hard to get to this. You know, I thought this is what you wanted for me. You know, you called me in the ministry, and then this is what I thought ministry was going to be like. And he completely broke that down in that moment. But that was a huge turning point for me to really kind of reevaluate what ministry actually was, versus something that was kind of up to that point, it was kind of self-serving to me. You know, I wasn't thinking as much about other people as I was thinking about myself. And so that was kind of the refocusing of ministry, but that also in that moment was me separating ministry from my relationship with God, because I just kind of always lumped that together. I remember we did this Bible study in high school in my Sunday school class that was discerning the will of God. I think it was like a Henry Blackaby study or something like that.
Classic.
And that was about the time, I'll tell you the story, where I kind of decided, okay, I can do music as you know, as a part of my ministry. And so it was like a graduation point from my perspective of, okay, this is the next step in my relationship with God, is to move into ministry. And which in a way it was, but it wasn't like there were two separate things. It was just one thing that kind of transitioned together.
Well, that's really interesting. So for you, ministry had always been, an achievement had always been coupled with your walk with Jesus. So in a sense, I guess what I'm trying to piece together here, what it sounds like is that moment in Nashville, you know, when I describe this decoupling of ministry and relationship, what it sounds like really happened there is that God said, look, following me means that you surrender your expectations for what this is going to look like. Because at that point in your life, there had been some solidified call. Like you would say, I feel like
absolutely.
God's going to use me in ministry. But what that moment was God saying, yeah, and if that's going to be true, it's got to be on my
We're going to do it my way,
and not achievement on your terms. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that was a graduation from one step to the other. And in my perspective, the achievement was this amount of success means I've arrived, you know, which is, I mean, we know that's not even how our Christian life works, but in my mind, that was like the next thing I had to accomplish.
It's amazing that God allowed you to get to what in your mind was going to be the pinnacle.
Right.
This was going to be the point where all of these dreams, all of these aspirations kind of meet a success point.
Right.
And somebody says, yes, this is who you are. That God lets you get to that point, and it's that point right there when they say no that God says, see?
Yeah,
it's got to be my way.
I think I would have been stubborn enough if we wouldn't have got to that point. I would have kept working really hard to get there no matter what. So I think him allowing us to get to that point and then breaking me was the only thing that could have happened, that I would have responded the way that I did.
You know, I think that says a lot about the patience of God. And for me, so in that really sticky point, when I was I was telling that story, like when I started out kind of in this rebellion in the 7th grade. That ran pretty heavy. We actually moved when I was in the 8th grade, which threw everything into a tailspin. I went from West Texas, small town, small bubble that I lived in, to Dallas, Fort Worth, kids that just a total new culture. All the while, I'm kind of like trying to figure out who in the world I am. So I just get totally absorbed in that, just totally swept into that culture, because I have no sense really of self. I've got this understanding that I am Christ's. And so that the Holy Spirit plays a role, kind of constantly pursuing, and kind of, I always had this nagging thing in the depths of my heart that was like, this is not who you are.
Yeah.
But I kept running from that. Anyway, fast forward. So when I was a sophomore in high school, and everything that you could imagine being out of whack is out of whack in my life at that point, and seems to be unraveling. A kid invites me to, and this is actually my entry. We talked about me being Methodist. This is actually my entry into the Baptist church. A kid invites me to what he called an accountability group, which for a Methodist kid, far from God, I had no idea what that meant.
Yeah.
So I was like, I don't know why I even went. This wasn't a kid I knew well.
Sounds weird.
It sounds super weird, super cultish, right? And I was like, I don't know, but I went. Like, for whatever reason, by God's grace, I went. And I think it was because I was hungry for something authentic, and I knew the things that were in my life were not authentic. So anyway, I go, and it's where I meet this guy. His name is Larry Grayson. Unbelievable man. He was a worship pastor at First Baptist Church in Louisville. And actually, I really hope to have him on the podcast at some point in the future. He's in Arkansas now, and just an incredible man. And he had been discipling teenagers for years and years and years. And what he would do is he would take this group of guys that were sophomores, juniors, or seniors, and he'd work them through high school. And they would meet together at his house, do Bible study, talk through things. I mean, and he would facilitate this discipleship group. And that's what I was being invited into. So I meet this man, and here's kind of my whole point. I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I meet him, and I can't imagine what my story and the chaos of my life at that point would have looked like coming in his front door.
Right.
But I wasn't met with this, man, you've got a lot of stuff wrong. We've got to get all this fixed. I was met by a man who saw God at work in my life and was patient with me as God worked all that out. And what he did is he just came along. He just got into the space of my life and walked with me in it. And he became a mentor. He became somebody that I could be honest with about my struggle and about my sin, because I knew that when I came to him with it, I wasn't going to be pushed out the door. I was going to be shepherded. I was going to be told the truth and held accountable, but also I was going to be loved in that moment.
Right.
And he was that presence in my life. I mean, when I was a sophomore in college, he baptized me. He spoke at our wedding. I mean, he was that presence in my life for a long, long time. And he just exemplified, I mean, I think in your story, the patience of God to allow you to get to that point. And God knows exactly this moment where he needs to speak into our life to bring truth and change. And Larry was really that presence. He was this patient presence, this patient voice of God in my life in all the chaos, but spoke truth on a consistent basis. And really was the voice that God used to kind of bring me away from the world and to see God's love for me clearly, to see God's call in my life, and to really call me into a serious following of Jesus. And that happened, all of that happened in that span of those teenage years. Right. You know, God worked some of the most deep and effective things in my life thus far in those years. And I think it's important that we tell those stories. So I think we don't often challenge on this podcast. There's no invitation per se on the podcast, but I think, man, if you're listening to this, I think just what a healthy exercise to take a minute and reflect back on how God has chased you, how God has been patient with you, how God has worked in those teenage years. And man, if you're in those years right now and it's messy and rough and you're sorting things out, man, just know that that God is doing incredible things in that stage of your life. It's not just teenage years to be dismissed, that God will actually do some of those powerful things he can do in your life. He's going to do in those years. So just cool to think back on that story. Any last thoughts on the adolescent years? I want to talk about one more thing. And,
I think it's important. I think when you're a teenager and in the first part of college, you kind of feel like you're on an island in those scenarios. And so I do think it's important that as that have moved on from those years, think back on those times to share our experiences with the teenagers and adolescents, just to help encourage them to know that there's a process going on there, and God is at work. You just have to kind of be patient. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, I want to transition real quick before we close. We've had some feedback on this podcast. There's people wanting to know, they've heard us say, hey, how do we, you've said ask questions and give topics, but we actually haven't told you how to do that. Yeah. So unless you've approached us personally and said, hey, talk about this, then we don't know. So what we've done is we've set up an email. An email, right? So here's what we want you to do. We want you to email, and here, this can be as broad, like whatever you want us to talk about. Or even if, and I think this would be cool too, even if there's really interesting people that you want us that would be great to interview. We've got a few people lined up, excited about some of those stories coming up. But emails, Blake, tell us, how does that work? It's very simple. Yep. You open up your email. That's right. And you type or hit the compose button, and in the where you're going to send it to, just put stc@fredoniahill.org. STC, for those of you sharp tools in the shed, that is sweet tea and coffee. STC. That's it. That's it. That's simple, and it'll show up in my email. And at fredoniahill.org. If you don't know how to spell Fredonia, FREDONIA, hill.org. That's it. That's it. Okay, so send us an email. If you've got something you want us to talk about, send us an email. That's all for today. Actually, let me tease the next episode. Here, coming up in this next episode, you're going to hear from the man we've referenced on many occasions, the great Matt Murray. That will be in the next episode, so stay tuned. That's all for today. We will see you guys soon. Adios. See ya.